Hello and welcome back to Ponder Policy. Today we're going to be talking about the 2024 presidential race between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and even with the margins of the various states, talking about where I think the race will stand come November. So starting off with the safe Biden states, California, Vermont, Massachusetts, Maine's first, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Maryland, D.C., no real surprises there. Illinois as well. And then going to states that Biden will definitely win, but the margin might be slightly slimmer, will be the Pacific Northwest, where Trump has had some favorable polls recently, but Biden will definitely take these states. There's no real effort being made by the Trump campaign in them, and I think these will be both over 10 points for Biden. Hawaii as well. This was a heavy Biden state in 2020, going to by nearly 30 points, And I think even after the wildfires in the state and the Biden administration's response to those, this state might be a bit closer. It's currently polling about D+8, but I think that might even be a little tighter than I would put it at. New York and New Jersey, and I think even Delaware, have had some favorable polling for Trump, or a tighter race in the states. These will probably be under 15 points, but then again, not going to be in play for Trump or competitive in any sort of way. New York has had some polls showing Biden below the 10-point margin, and New Jersey has a slightly more competitive Senate contest, which might also drive turnout for Trump within the state, but New Jersey still has about 1 million more registered Democrats than Republicans, so it's going to be hard for Trump to make any inroads into that state. Going to safe Trump states, Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, North Dakota, South Dakota, just the Midwest center of the country, no surprise there. Montana, which has been hovering around 15 points, I think is going to be safe as well. Nebraska, first, third, and at large. Kansas has had some success for statewide Democrats recently, but I think even then it's going to be a safe Trump state. Oklahoma, a lot of the South and Appalachia. I think with Haley and Scott's endorsements in South Carolina, the state might go back above 15 points for Trump, especially because this is considered to be a favorable election for Trump at the moment. And going to states that Trump is very likely to win are going to be Florida, where Trump has had huge gains in polls recently, going from 2016, where he was up about 1.2, 2020, where he was above 3 points, and after the 2022 midterms in the state, where DeSantis, the governor, nearly won by 20 points, and statewide races for Republicans went by double digits, Trump is probably going to pull 8 to 13 points within this state, which has received a lot of Republican internal migration from northern states. A lot of Republican voters have moved to Florida, and the voter demographics here have been very favorable to Republicans recently. Alaska, too, even though independents are the largest voting group, and even though this was one of the closer Trump states in 2020, only 10 points, even though that's a safe margin, it's probably going to stay sort of around that margin. Democrats have had some success in the states when they come out in favor of conservation and Second Amendment rights. So I think it's not impossible that the state may become a little bit narrower in this election. It's certainly shifting slowly in Democrats' favor, but that might have a reversal. It's a very up-in-the-air state. Texas, too, I think Trump, even though there was some news about the state becoming closer in 2020, Trump still finished at 5.6% in the state. So I think Trump is probably going to improve on that margin, finish around 7 in Texas, despite migration from California. You have a lot of Republican voters coming from California as opposed to Democratic voters. There's a large exodus from California 2020 to 2024, following like the COVID pandemic and everything. And that played differently, different parts of the country. And the other places I would put as likely Republican are Iowa and Ohio, which have been voting in unison recently. And these states moved to the right relative to the country 2016 to 2020. So I think they are very likely going to be going to Trump by safer margins, well over 8% like they did 4 years ago. Biden also, forgot to mention, Gold Crown Politics actually has, in one of his projections, this is more of a Trump landslide scenario, but New Mexico going to Trump. I don't see this being likely at all, considering Biden has been polling at about D+8 within the state of New Mexico. I just don't see Trump making much inroads into the state. Same with Colorado. I think it's going to be under 15 points, even though this had a large left-leaning shift. But I think this is going to be a likely state for Biden, too. I forgot to mention Trump in the 2nd District of Maine. No real surprise there. Similar margins to 4 years ago. Maybe even improve on those. This has gotten much more Republican. It might be R+10 or something. And I think the remaining states are states that, while I don't think it's entirely likely that either candidate wins outright, I don't think it's impossible that candidates can win any of these states. They all seem to be, at least long shot for some of these, but they all seem to be in play to a regard. I think the Real Clear Politics averages had these states being more competitive, and I think I would agree with that assessment. So starting off with Biden, state that I think he's going to win, Minnesota by a lean margin. Polls show him tied with Trump in a head-to-head race, but when you include Kennedy and third parties, Biden is up by 2. Trump has said that this state is now in play for his campaign, but Minnesota voted for Biden by over 7 points 4 years ago, and despite the uncommitted vote for Biden in the Democratic primaries, I think it's going to be a hard margin to make up for Trump. Same with New Hampshire, because the state, at least relative to other swing states which have had some favorable polling to Trump, New Hampshire has definitely remained one of those more safe states that neither candidate has had to expend too much effort in, just because the polls are more heavily favored. For Biden, probably a 3 to 6 point victory, somewhere in that margin. Maine at large, there's been some news because there were some polls showing the two tied in Maine at large for the first time, but those have since shifted more in Biden's favor, and I don't see that there to be any real motion in the state. Virginia, I think, is an interesting state just because Biden and Trump are tied in a number of recent polls, but remembering that Glenn Youngkin, the Republican governor who won in 2021, sort of in an upset victory, put together a more establishment, more moderate coalition of Republicans within the state, with Trump's support, of course. But I don't see Trump sort of capturing that same establishment Republican crowd. And I think this state is going to be tighter. I don't think it's impossible that Trump can win the state, but I think it's still going to be D plus, maybe 2 to 5, somewhere in that margin. Probably under 5 points. It's going to be closer than it was for Biden. It's going to be closer than it was for Hillary. Clinton. I should specify because there's two Clintons. But moving back into the Trump column, I think North Carolina is a pretty easy state to give to him in a lean margin, just because this state has just been out of reach for Democrats consistently since Obama. I mean, Obama's victory in the state was even tighter than it was in Indiana in 2008. It was a closer margin. And since North Carolina, despite it being somewhat close in 2020, has just been out of reach, and Trump is up in the polls in the state, it's just not going to be easy for Biden to make any move in the state, despite him making efforts to. Probably going to be R+3-ish, I would think. And then these are considered the primary 6 swing states. Nebraska second as well, and is what a lot of the commentary is surrounding. I did want to cover sort of the more safe states for each candidate and where I think the margins will end up, just because there's been some interesting developments in these more liberal states and some more interesting developments in more conservative states that I think is worth mentioning. But in terms of these states, which are going to be deciding the election, the ones that I would give to Trump by more likely margins, Nevada is currently outside the polling error for Biden, so Trump is so far up in the polls so consistently that Biden, even if Republicans are overestimated in Nevada polls, which they are pretty often overestimated, I think it's not a state that Biden has made too much effort to try to win. It might be a flip for Trump for the first time. He didn't flip Nevada in 2016 or 2020. But I think this state, which has had a large voter demographic shifts, especially in the Reno area, might go red for the first time in a while. Georgia as well. Favorable polling to Trump just consistently. This is a state that's reacted well to for Trump, to all of his indictments and anything else in the polling data. The recent verdict on the New York case, I think, has actually boosted his polling numbers within the state to the point where Georgia is probably going to be more than a point victory for Trump. And the Biden campaign has abandoned a lot of its efforts to win over the state again, like they did in 2020. Going into the Biden column, I think the state that I would have him be the most likely to win on this map would be Pennsylvania. I think this is going to be a very close race. It's more contentious down ballot races where Democrats are more favored to win, but Trump is still leading in the presidential contest on polls. And I think Pennsylvania in general is just going to be a very tight state. The Biden campaign hasn't been doing as well as they did in 2020 in sort of eastern Pennsylvania fundraising in the Philadelphia suburbs, and the same turnout in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh that drove Biden to victory in the state in 2020 is likely to not replicate itself. So I still have this state going to Biden by a small margin, but it's still probably going to be a Biden state. Same with Michigan. I think Biden had the slight edge here, even though Trump is favored in the polls. Biden had a contentious primary in Michigan with a large uncommitted vote, and I think Biden might pull through in the state just because of the 3 Rust Belt trio. He did the best in Michigan, winning it by 2.4 points just 4 years ago. And even if that same coalition doesn't replicate itself, I think he has enough support within the state to carry him for the presidency again. And for Trump, I think Wisconsin, first time the Rust Belt trio has split in many elections. I think Trump is favored to win just because the voter demographics here are just so in his favor. Polls consistently underestimate Republicans within the state. But in the 2022 midterms, Ron Johnson, with his Senate contest, won by 1.2. I don't know that Trump's going to mimic that margin, but I think he's going to do well in the state. It's much more rural, much whiter, less college educated, and those are the demographics that Republicans lead in. And I think Arizona might come down to being one of the tightest races, because this is a state that Trump is leading in the polls consistently in, but at the same time you have a Senate election that's going to be very close. You have an abortion referendum on the ballot, which is going to drive Democratic turnout. At the moment, I have this being a tilt margin for Trump. I think it's very up in the air. Nevada could narrow down, and if Nevada and Arizona could narrow down or even flip, if different voting like changes in polls happen with the Hispanic communities, or if border policies change, anything could happen in the next 5 months that just change up these 2 states. in the Southwest, and I think they are going to be, both of these, not just Arizona, but Nevada, are going to be very close. But as of right now, I have it in the Trump column. And I think Nebraska's second is just, even though this state was redistricted following the 2020 election, Nebraska's second was supposed to become more Republican, but just because of the demographic changes in Omaha, which is where this district is, it's very unlikely that Trump can take that district, and I think that's going to be a Biden edge in that area. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Currently we have Trump winning in tight fashion, and leave a like on the video and subscribe. Thank you.